the financial house of cards collapses, and the overinflated stock market plunges into a Great Depression.
Ever wondered what people ate to survive the Great Depression? Brace yourself as we uncover 20 brutal meals people ate from that challenging era. You won't believe what was on the menu. Number 20. Roadkill. How flat is it and how fresh is it? These were the two main questions asked when handed roadkill. Let's dive into some surprising recipes. We've all been speeding down the highway when we happened upon a dead animal in the ditch or on the side of the road. Normally, the animal patrol sends out someone to pick up the dead critter so it can be disposed of properly. Though there are some people today who think this is a waste of perfectly good food. During the Great Depression, nothing went to waste, not even roadkill. Rabbit, possum, squirrel, raccoon, deer, bear, moose, elk, and pheasants are some of the most collected from roadsides and delivered to a kitchen to be turned into cuisine. A well-known recipe, Brunswick stew, was made with squirrel and rabbit. That was all the more flavorful if the roadkill had been aged. The working premise for many who cooked up meals using roadkill was, don't ask, don't tell. As long as the meat was still fresh and nutritious, people didn't care where it came from. If it kept hunger at bay for another day, then it was considered good cooking. Number 19. Snapping turtle soup. Turtle soup wasn't just a delicacy. It was a survival strategy during the Great Depression. Discover the unexpected taste of snapping turtle. Tasting like a combination of pork, clams, and chicken thighs, no snapping turtle was safe during the Great Depression. Snapping turtles are cold-blooded reptiles and a cousin to lizards, snakes, and alligators. On average, they weigh 10 to 36 pounds each. Capturing a snapping turtle is not for the faint of heart. They hiss like a cat if you get too close, and their jaws can easily bite off a finger. Folklore claims that the head can still bite you, even after a snapping turtle is beheaded. While that may or may not be true, turtles were easily acquired in the spring during mating season, when they were on the move and were sometimes seen crossing roads. Being out of their natural water environment made it much easier to catch. To catch one of the hard-shelled creatures, a particularly brave soul would go so far as to get behind a snapping turtle and pick it up by its tail, capturing it to become a meal. Turtle soup is essentially a vegetable stew with turtle meat instead of beef or chicken. To make the soup, the turtle meat simmers in a water bath with celery, onion, and carrots. When ready, the turtle with the shell still attached is lifted from the pot, and the meat is picked off the carcass. Eating turtle soup was a way to survive during the Great Depression. Today, it's considered a delicacy. Number 18. Ketchup soup. Yummy! Who knew ketchup could save the day? Learn how a simple condiment became a staple in Depression-era kitchens. In the 2004 Hollywood movie, The Terminal, starring Tom Hanks, a foreign traveler is stranded in an airport while his homeland is in the midst of a coup, and he cannot legally leave the building. Without funds, he resorts to raiding the food court condiment stand and initially subsist on free crackers loaded with the contents of the tomato, ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, and relish packets. As bad as the economy seems right now, it's been worse, much worse, as in ketchup soup for dinner worse. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, although few people were outright starving, filling the belly sometimes called for resourcefulness. It was common for folks to put a small amount of ketchup in a cup and add hot water to make ketchup soup. This basic yet flavorful broth was a quick way to prepare a warm meal, often using just free condiment packets, demonstrating a resourceful use of limited supplies. When possible, they would add cream or milk to make it more palatable and nutritious. Number 17. Garbage pails. Not your average meal. Explore how garbage pails became a hearty feast during the lean years of the Great Depression. The name itself shows that this might not be the most appetizing dish on the market. After all, most people are not too eager to chomp down on some garbage. This dish was actually served in restaurants during the Great Depression. Although it is not actually garbage and is more just a combination of multiple other dishes, it still does not sound that appealing. Maybe it wasn't the tastiest dish, but it was filling. Garbage plates are an eclectic mix of comfort foods, typically combining meat like hot dogs and hamburgers with home fries and macaroni salad, all topped with various condiments. The dish exemplifies a no-waste approach to cooking, utilizing all available ingredients to create a satisfying and flavorful meal. The Great Depression garbage plate was often served at diners in the western New York region. Made with a variety of combinations of flavors, but all are loaded with nutrients and needed calories. The dish is usually made with a combination of home fries, baked beans, macaroni salad, ground beef, and sometimes sausage. Then they top this mixture of ingredients with chili, onions, hot sauce, mustard, and ketchup. Number 16. Vinegar Desperation Pie. Have you ever thought of what a pie would taste like if it was made with vinegar? Discover the surprisingly sweet side of Depression-era desserts. Although that is probably the last ingredient you would think of when you were going to make a pie, that is exactly what many people used when they were growing up trying to save money. Not everyone was able to access fruits and sugars and all of the tasty ingredients that are associated with normal pies. As a result, they would end up using apple cider vinegar in the pies in order to make them different and tasty. And you'd be surprised how good they tasted. Vinegar pie used apple cider vinegar in the filling. Martha Stewart's site claims it was first invented during the days of covered wagons, and when fresh produce was scarce again in the early 1900s, the vinegar pie made a comeback and actually hasn't left. Vinegar pie, known during the Great Depression as a desperation pie, was a creative solution for dessert when expensive ingredients were scarce. Using simple pantry items like vinegar, sugar, and spices, homemakers could make a tangy and satisfying custard pie. It's somewhat sad to think that people would eat a pie filled with a bunch of vinegar, but this is about being creative and pinching the penny. This dish illustrated the adaptability and inventiveness required to navigate through tough economic times. Number 15. Water pie. Don't be fooled by its name. Water pie was a clever creation born out of necessity. Find out how this Depression-era pie kept families satisfied. When you first hear the phrase hot water pie, you may not think that there is any way that can be filling and tasty. However, the name doesn't quite reveal exactly what this Depression-era food actually consisted of. Although there is a filling that requires hot water in the recipe, it is not as bland as it sounds. There is also butter, eggs, and sugar involved along with a proper pie crust. It certainly was not the most luxurious food, but this vintage classic of the era was a great way to spread out difficult-to-come-by ingredients into something that would be filling. It goes without saying that during the Great Depression all food was scarce. This meant cooks had to find creative ways to use cheap, readily available ingredients to make something edible and, if possible, tasty. Water pie is a prime example of this, boasting a filling that's made, as the name suggests, mostly from water. When the water is combined with sugar, butter, a little vanilla, and flour, baked and then cooled, it results in a filling with a custard-like consistency. Food writer Harold McGee pointed out at Atlas Obscura that this consistency is due to the combination of flour and water, saying, if you think about mixing flour or cornstarch and water, the consistency you get will depend on the proportions. So, if you're adding a little cornstarch to thicken a stir-fry, you'll end up with something sauce-like. But on the other extreme, Turkish Delight is essentially a gel of cornstarch and sugar and nothing else. Water pie is essentially in the middle of those two extremes. The finished pie is not all that bad, thanks to an overwhelmingly sweet taste. What's more, it's versatile and can be made richer through the addition of egg yolks, while other flavors can be used in place of the vanilla. One variation even sees the water replaced with Sprite. Number 14. Hearty soups. Soups that saved. Explore the hearty and inventive way families stretched their meals during the Great Depression. Soups are filling, comforting, and cheap. In short, they are perfect to fall back onto in hard times. During the Great Depression, many soup recipes began arising out of need, hunger, and creativity. Soups in this era were designed to be as nutritious as possible, and for some families, they were a part of everyday life for dinner. They would often be as loaded as possible. Potato, onions, and beans could all be found floating just underneath the surface. Buttermilk would also be added to further thicken up the soup and fill stomachs. The Great Depression kitchen was not one that would throw away food that could be used, and often this meant that leftovers would get tossed into the soup bowl. While this usually meant leftover meats, some families would take this to new extremes. One journalist recalls her grandmother's Depression soup, which contained a roving collection of all kitchen scraps in one bowl. Anything from fish heads to rabbit bones and bits of rice and broccoli ends would patchwork themselves into the freezer box broth. While this may be far from what we can stomach today, as the journalist notes, perhaps there's something to learn from the stick-to-itness of the Depression-era soup. Number 13, rice pudding. The comforting dessert that made tough times a little sweeter. Uncover its humble origins and enduring popularity. Rice pudding was considered a cheap but delicious luxury snack or dessert during the Depression. It was the stick-to-your-ribs type of food that became popular out of necessity. Luckily, this is one dish that was tasty as well, and there have been many variations over the years. It's no surprise this comfort food is especially popular during our current era of fear and uncertainty. Rice pudding back then was a lot simpler, as it was made as something to eat and help people to fill their stomach, not as something that was made for pleasure. I always waited eagerly for the first heavenly bite. You probably wouldn't consider rice pudding to be something that was created as a result of the Great Depression. However, that is sort of part of the story. Of course, the rice pudding that people are familiar with these days is not quite the same as the plain and simple rice pudding that was popular out of necessity during the Great Depression. However, the origins are the same, although not the taste. Though not particularly unfamiliar today and often eaten during high holidays, rice pudding was a perfect dessert for cash-strapped Americans during the Great Depression. A little more extravagant than some of the other desserts of the Depression, the rice was cooked with water and milk first to create a thick, delicious texture. Number 12, peanut butter. Peanut butter is an ingredient that everyone knows, but it was the Great Depression that really put it on the map and on the plate. The late 20s saw the rise of major peanut butter brands, some of which still exist to this day, including Skippy and Peter Pan, which were able to produce peanut butter in masses and lower the price on what was once a luxury good reserved for the well-to-do. During the harder times of the Great Depression, peanut butter was especially important, in that it was low in cost and high in calories. These were two critical considerations for many people, and often peanut butter sandwiches would even be handed out in food lines. Around the same time, soft and cheap white bread had also been developed. The ingredients for the modern American sandwich had been developed just in the nick of time and would stay much longer as a childhood staple for many Americans to come. People began to create a variety of peanut butter sandwiches, including the peanut butter and pickle sandwich, a combination that still has some fans today. Aside from sandwiches, peanut butter was used as one of the main ingredients when making a no-yeast bread. Finally, and perhaps most surprising for us in the 21st century, was a heavily promoted dish known as peanut butter stuffed onions. As the name suggests, this dish saw onion halves filled with peanut butter. Even after baking, this combination feels somewhat disconcerting. Number 11, Italian rice. Beat the heat with Depression-era Italian rice. Simple, refreshing, and surprisingly delicious. Italian ice was popular during the time because of its similarity to ice cream without the addition of costly ingredients like cream and rock salt. This frozen treat was inexpensive and helped stave off the heat during the long summer days. Italian ice had no dairy and no egg in the mixture. Though just a few ingredients consisting of sugar, water, and fruit juice or fruit flavoring, This dish would have to be stirred constantly over a period of 5 hours. After boiling a cup or half a cup of sugar and water and juice on the stove, the mixture would be set in a freezer to set. At regular intervals, it would be taken out and stirred until it thickened and could be stirred. Number 10. Gelatin dishes everywhere. Jiggle your way through Depression-era meals with these gelatinous delights. A quirky staple that kept families fed. In the mid-19th century, the Industrial Revolution was beginning to transform the U.S. economy. Railways were on the rise, and so was factory production. Both brought radical changes to American food systems. By 1897, when a cough syrup maker patented the brand name Jell-O, the processed food industry was thriving. You're probably only familiar with gelatin when it refers to the additive that is put in many different foods nowadays. However, gelatin was a complete dish and a full vintage recipe that was made with canned corned beef, plain gelatin, canned peas, vinegar, lemon juice, and occasionally cabbage. It does not sound too appetizing, but it was a great way for people to get all of their vitamins in a cheap way. The main nutrient that was offered was protein, which was actually one of the harder ones to obtain at the time. So it was a great option for people everywhere, hence its popularity. Raspberry Jell-O mixed with sugar, milk, vanilla extract, and whipped heavy cream reportedly comes together to make no-churn ice cream. Glenn from the Glenn and Friends Cooking YouTube channel tried it out. That doesn't guarantee it's any good, but Jell-O's fine, and ice cream is ice cream. Although it can't compare to Ben & Jerry's, he says that it would have been a real treat during the Depression. This recipe's beauty lies in its origins. Number 9. Chop suey of the Great Depression. Chop suey, not just a dish, but a symbol of adaptability during the Great Depression. Explore its humble beginnings and lasting appeal. Chop suey is a well-loved dish even in modern times. It is versatile, tasty, and leaves people satisfied and happy. It is also nutritious, which was as important during the Great Depression as it is today. It was made by combining just about whatever vegetables you had in the house, cooking them simply, and then placing it on top of rice if you were lucky enough to have some. You could also add in some meat or pasta to the mix if you were able to. There were really no rules to this versatile and potentially tasty dish. This American chop suey from 1938 was popular with families in the Northeast. It is a mishmash of ground beef and macaroni, or rice, sauce, and macaroni. Sure, some of these Great Depression recipes haven't stood the test of time, but back then they were favorites among families who needed to keep things cheap, yet nutritious. Through tough times, they were able to invent dishes that stand the test of time. Macaroni is eaten daily. Apple pie is an American staple, and people have taken numerous adaptations on different breads. Number 8. Mayo cake. Mayonnaise in cake? Discover the surprisingly sweet side of this Depression-era dessert. Of all the suspicious ingredients to add to cake batter, mayonnaise is certainly on the top of the list. Known for adorning meat-laden sandwiches and turning everything from eggs to Jell-O into salad, mayo doesn't seem like a customary ingredient for brownies. Mayonnaise cake sounds crazy. The thought of mayonnaise, which is delicious on a sandwich or in potato salad, in a sweet-like cake is just, well, bizarre. But during the Great Depression, simple and easy to find ingredients for us, oil and eggs, had rations placed on them. Mayonnaise at its simplest is a silky emulsion of eggs, acid like vinegar or lemon, and oil. When you break it down to its roots, you can see why it makes sense in baking. Its components make it a perfectly suitable substitute for oil. Its thick and creamy constitution is similar to that of softened butter, and since it already has eggs in it, mayonnaise exhibits some of the binding power of eggs when cooked. When you think about what's in mayo, eggs, vinegar, and oil, it makes sense that it was used in cake. Its components make it a perfectly suitable substitute for oil. Its thick and creamy constitution is similar to that of softened butter, and since it already has eggs in it, mayonnaise exhibits some of the binding power of eggs when cooked. It's like combining the ingredients into one and shortening the recipe. Most cakes call for eggs and oil, and some call for buttermilk, which is similar to vinegar in a recipe. It's important to also note that no salt in the recipe is due to the salt in mayonnaise. A fun fact is during the Great Depression, this recipe could be found on the mayo jar. Plenty of people over the years have found inventive ways to use mayo. A cake is about as inventive as it gets. The Great Depression affected thousands of lives in the U.S. and around the world. Inventive ideas like this kept people fed, and some still stand the test of time. Number 7. Coffee soup. Coffee as soup? Dive into the Amish tradition that turned a morning pick-me-up into a hearty meal during tough times. The Amish have been known for their plain and simple meals. Always frugal, they had to be even more so during the Great Depression, as it hit them particularly hard during this challenging time in America's history. So coffee soup was a common breakfast meal, and it's a little more complex than the extra hot venti latte you're sipping on now. Most Amish were farmers in those days, and the Great Depression decimated agriculture. So the already frugal Amish were forced to rely on even less. So soups that required very few ingredients became a culinary staple. Coffee soup was made by placing bite-sized pieces of dry or hard bread in the bottom of a bowl. Next, brewed coffee was poured over the bread, followed by sugar and cream or milk, which turned the whole thing into a gruel. Coffee soup was warmed to fill stomachs with, and a load of carbohydrates and sugar provided energy for the hard day's work ahead. Number 6. Jell-O ice cream. Desserts were rationed during the Depression. Ice cream wasn't plentiful. If homemakers had to choose between bread or meat and ice cream, they would spend their money on nutritional food. For mothers, Jell-O ice cream was an easy, no-churn way to give their family a treat. If a family lived in the country, chances are the family owned their own milking cow, leaving only a packet of Jell-O to be purchased at the store, and some vanilla rifled from the cupboards. The raspberry Jell-O was dissolved in boiling water, and then sugar, milk, and vanilla were added. Finally, a cup of heavy cream was whipped until it formed stiff peaks. The whipped cream was folded into the Jell-O mix. The entire concoction was put in the freezer to set up. This poor man's ice cream couldn't compete with store-bought ice cream, but kids didn't care. It was sweet and tasty, and a real cheap treat for cash-strapped households. Number 5. Squirrel pot pie. Squirrel in a pie? Discover how this humble meat became a staple in Depression-era cooking. Squirrel was another common source of protein, and it could be made into a pot pie with vegetables and gravy. It was often made into a pie, a delicious way to cook up the hunt. Squirrel is about the most ethical meat you can serve on a dinner plate. It's free-range, plentiful, and low in fat. It also tends to be local and sustainable. What does squirrel meat really taste like? It has a deeper, stronger flavor, more like duck or lamb, although some people claim it tastes like some heritage breed of pork. According to chef and author Georgia Pellegrini, in general, squirrel meat is nutty and sweet, buttery and tender. Keep in mind that while different species of squirrel have slightly different flavor profiles, how any individual squirrel tastes is going to depend most heavily on what they've been eating. Number 4. Boiled bone necks and hog maw. This dish used leftover scraps from butchering pigs. Neck bones provided some meat, while the hog maw added a gelatinous texture. This meal is not for the squeamish. Hog maw is the stomach of a pig prepared as food. More specifically, it is the exterior muscular wall of the stomach organ, with interior lining, mucosis removed, which contains no fat if cleaned properly. It can be found in American, soul food, Chinese, Pennsylvania Dutch, Mexican, Portuguese, Italian, and Vietnamese dishes. In addition, it can be prepared in various ways, including stewed, fried, baked, and boiled. Number 3. Eyeball soup? Yes, you heard that right, eyeball soup. Find out how cows' eyeballs made their way into Depression-era kitchens. This might be the most brutal on the list. Cows' eyeballs were simmered in broth with vegetables for a cheap source of protein. The texture was unappetizing for many. Many scenes of parents, children, and others struggling daily to gather enough food to eat played out during the lean years of the Great Depression. After the stock market crash of 1929, the American economy plummeted. Thousands of people lost their jobs. At this point in U.S. society, most families relied on the man to work and provide a source of income, while the mother cared for children and the household. With many men now out of work, it often became difficult for families to support themselves. Parents struggled to cut corners to make ends meet. Men, women, and sometimes even children took on what jobs they could find and used all the means available to them to stretch their resources to their limits. Number 2. Coffee substitutes. The Great Depression remains the most severe international financial crisis in the history of the global economy. The rise in interest rates in 1928 started the Great Depression. The Depression was so deep due to the multitude of factors, including the lack of credibility and cooperation, the trade war, uncertainty, debt deflation, and stick wages. In the 1920s, the U.S. accounted for 80% of the world's demand for coffee, and as demand was high, prices were high and stable as well. With coffee prices high, people look for a replacement. Coffee substitutes are non-coffee products, usually without caffeine, that are used to imitate coffee. Dandelion root tea, roasted chicory root, or even boiled barley were used as substitutes, but lacked the familiar taste of coffee. One such substitute is the chicory root plant. This plant is actually related to dandelions, and it is a perennial, which means it doesn't die off every year. Chicory coffee was cheap, and for this reason, it's been used in times of coffee shortage or economic crises, like the Civil War, and spread across the United States during the Great Depression. It's also been used to stretch supplies in prisons. Number 1. Dandelion green salad. Did you know dandelions were more than just weeds during the Great Depression? Explore how they became a nutritious salad. They say there are no free meals in life, but sometimes, with a little ingenuity, there are. The French are famous for foraging wild, fresh greens. Depression-era homemakers took a page from French cuisine when they started keeping a close eye on their yards after a long winter. One of the early springtime weeds to sprout and pepper lawns with their yellow flowers is the dandelion. These days, in many parts of the country, lawns are sprayed with weed killers to eliminate this nuisance plant. But many people don't know that if you pick the leaves of dandelions when they are young and tender, you can create a salad with them, and it's free. Depression-era homemakers waited expectantly for dandelions to start popping up out of the ground. The tender leaves were picked in early spring, washed, and made into a nutritious salad. Hard-boiled eggs and bacon bits were often added to the greens. The leftover bacon grease was combined with vinegar to make a dressing, salt and pepper, and voila! If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights and quirky food facts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.